Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Education USA India App Camp webinar series. This is a eight series webinar sessions, and we are entering the fifth session of this series. Before we begin the session, I would just like to take you through some housekeeping rules. And I'm sure most of you who have been attending these sessions by now would know what are those rules and regulations. Please make sure you use headphones for enhanced audio quality. At all times, please keep your mics and videos muted. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box. If you are joining us from the YouTube Education USA India YouTube channel, please put in your questions in the comments box. We make sure that during the session, we try enough to share the best resources possible. And if in case you missed any of them, please do reach out to the Education USA Center near to you to get more information on those resources we share. So we welcome you all to this great session today. The app camp started on August 3rd, and we had so far 4 sessions completed. And the 5th session today is on resume writing, which is a great opportunity to showcase your profile to the US universities. I'm sure most of you who are joining the session today will be going through this process of preparing a strong application package to US universities, and you are at the right place to understand how to project a resume that's really compelling to the admission committee to read through. We have great panelists joining us today, and soon I'll be making an introduction about all of them. Those of you who are joining us for the first time in the series, I would like to give a quick introduction to Education USA. Education USA is your official source on US higher education. We are supported by the US Department of State. Our mandate is to offer accurate, comprehensive, current, and of course, unbiased information on US higher education. We have more than 430 plus centers spread across 170 plus countries. And India alone, we have a presence across 7 cities, 8 centers managed by 4 different host institutions. I'm Shanti Mohan, and I'm joining you from the Education USA Center in Chennai, managed by USAF, US India Educational Foundation. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues from USIF Hyderabad, Miran, and Deepika Rawat from Education USA Center in New Delhi, and I'm supported by Janet Turner, Center Head from Education USA Center, Ahmedabad, who's supporting us with our live streaming today. So we are a big network of advisors who are here to help students who aspire to study in their US. At the Education USA Centers, we advocate a 5-step process to US higher education. And this is pretty much a well laid out 5-step process. And if you are able to adhere to this alongside a stipulated timeline, I'm sure you will be landing in your dream school at the end of this process. So the step 1 is researching all your options thoroughly so that you understand the best fit institutions for you. Alongside, you will also carry out the step 2, which will help you to assess your capability to pay for the education, as well as understand what are the various resources available at the universities in the form of fellowships and scholarships. The step 3 is the most crucial step, and our entire App Camp series will address the various components of an US university application. And by preparing a robust application, you're sure that you will be able to definitely get good number of admissions. After successful admissions, you will go through the step 4, which is preparing yourself to obtain a student visa. And once you have a student visa on hand, it'll be step 5, where you prepare to leave the country. All the Education USA centers across India and across the globe provide students with the right resource for all the 5 steps to US study. I don't want to take much of your time on elaborating those steps, but we have our renowned panelists here who are here to share their valuable inputs on preparing a strong resume or activities list when it comes to undergraduate students. Also, our panel is going to talk about what is a typical American style resume. So that might help many of you to prepare one which builds a more familiarity for all the admission officers. So I'm going to go one by one. We have with us today Brian Philip King. He's the 2018-19 Fulbright Fellow and currently studying at the Villanova University. Brian is originally from Edison, New Jersey, and he was awarded the Fulbright Nehru Teaching Fellowship for the 2018-2019 academic year. That year, Brian lived in Kanchipuram, Tamil Nadu, and he taught spoken English and facilitated reading and drama clubs for students at SSKV Boys Matriculation Higher Secondary School. Brian is an active member of the Fulbright Alumni Association of Greater New York City, and he is currently pursuing Master of Business Administration MBA at the Villanova School of Business in Pennsylvania. Welcome, Brian. Lorenzo Wilcox is an assistant director for international recruitment at the University of Oregon's Office of Admissions. He is a proud alumnus of the University of Oregon and graduated with a degree in international studies with a focus on diplomacy and international studies. He also did a minor in political science. Recently, he received his Master's of Science degree from Portland State University in the field of educational leadership and policy. Lorenzo is going to talk more about undergraduate resume. Welcome, Lorenzo, for this session. Stephen Swan is the Director of Graduate Student Recruitment at the University of Louisville College of Business. He earned his Master of Science in International Relations in 2011 and has spent the past 11 years managing international student service and recruitment activities for a top 50 liberal arts college and now the premier university in Kentucky, USA. As an experienced international education professional, Stephen now manages a global team of graduate admission professionals seeking to make the College of Business one of the top destinations for future business leaders and executives from around the world. Welcome, Stephen. And Stephen, as you know, is going to cover a lot about graduate student resume. And we do know for the fact that many of the participants who have joined here are aspiring graduate students to various schools in the US. Welcome, Stephen, and thank you all for this wonderful session. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Over to you, Brian, for taking this up.
Thank you for the introduction, Shanti ma'am. So I'm going to be sharing today a little bit of the background of a difference between what might set an American style resume apart from maybe other versions that you've created in the past. So here are my slides here. And as we work through this, as Shanti mentioned, I was a Fulbright Nehru Teaching Fellow in Tamil Nadu for the 2018-2019 academic year. So what that means is the Fulbright program is the flagship international education exchange program sponsored by the US government, and it offers grants to study, teach, and conduct research for US citizens to go abroad and for non-US citizens to come to the United States. So Shanti was mentioning those EducationUSA centers across India. There are also opportunities to apply for the Fulbright Fellowship to come to the United States, to teach a language, to do research, or also to study. So as Shanti mentioned, I was in Kanchipuram for 1 year. So I was teaching at the SSKV Boys School there, primarily in the middle school and also in the secondary school as well. So the question starts with, what is a resume? So let's start with what it's not. It's not a CV. So a CV is a curriculum vitae, and it's usually a lengthy description of one's education and work experience. It typically focuses on publications and conference papers and presentations, all of which might find its way onto the resume, but it really isn't the bulk. It really isn't the primary information. It's also not a biodata. So in a biodata, you might include one's date of birth, gender, marital status, religion, parents' names, interests, hobbies. That really, a lot of that information would be considered inappropriate on an American style resume. So we would typically leave most of that information off. So an American style resume is a summary of one's educational background, work experiences, professional skills, and achievements contained on one single page. So sometimes you might see a second page being used in a resume, but really for the examples that I'm going to be showing today, it's really containing all of those achievements and experiences and skills on that one single page. So a resume, it is your first impression. So whether you are applying for a postgraduate fellowship, an undergraduate admission, or graduate admission, this is typically going to be one of the first things that a counselor is going to be looking at. So make sure that it is easy to read and make sure that it is concise. So typically, you might find a lot of templates and a word processing tool, or whether that's Microsoft Word or Apple Pages or Google Sheets or something like that. But I really like to begin with a blank document, and that really ensures that the resume that is being created is unique to you. So you'll also find in a lot of those templates, you might find some spacing issues, you might find some wonky formatting errors, and you don't want that to be your first impression. So really start with that blank document. And once you open up that blank document, you're going to want to set your margins to make them a little bit more narrow than usual. So I typically like to recommend keeping the margins within 0.5 inches to 1 inch. And you can facilitate that and format that right in your word processor. And that really expands the page so that you're able to share as much about yourself and your experiences and your successes as you can. You're also going to want to choose a font between 10 points and 12 points. That really makes it easy to read for the admissions counselor. And also remember to use a font that's professional. So Arial, Times New Roman, Calibri, those are three that come to the top of my mind. Also within there is, you're going to want to include your contact information. So at the very top of your resume, you're going to want to include your full name. Your full name is the aspect of the resume that's going to be larger than that 12-point font. You can really increase that font point to 14 point or even 16 point. So really, as you're making an introduction, your name is standing out alongside all of your achievements. You're also going to want to include your home address, where you're based. So you are going to want to make sure that you're including city, state, and country. So for international students applying to positions in the United States, it's really important to say state and country because, you know, a lot of places might have the same names across multiple countries. You're going to want to include your email ID. And you want to make sure that that is a professional email ID and one that you're going to have access to for the long haul. So a good start might be your first name, your last name. So my name is Brian King. So my email address is brian.king at the email ID provider. You're going to want to keep numbers to a minimum. So if you want to include your name and maybe the number 1, that's completely professional. But once you start including multiple numbers, your whole birthday, that really takes away from the professional read of your resume. You're also going to want to include your contact number. So WhatsApp is sometimes used in the United States, but not nearly as common as it is in India. So if you're going to use that, make sure that you're using the country code, so +91, and also make sure that if somebody is calling you, that your outgoing voicemail message is appropriate and professional and is reflective of who you are. The next part of your resume is really going to be academic experiences. So many of you that are coming from either a secondary school or an undergraduate experience this is going to be the bulk of your resume. And you're going to want to outline your experiences using reverse chronological order. What I mean there is you're going to want to place the most recent information at the top of the resume. So right now I am pursuing my Master's of Business Administration. That would be at the top. And then I would include my bachelor's degree after that. So using what's most recent first. Also in this section, you're also going to want to identify your school. What is the name of your school? What is the location? Again, thinking about city, state, country, and also the dates of enrollment to show when you started in the school, or at least when you graduate, or when you're anticipating to graduate. So if you are not expecting to graduate until May of 2023, you can put that date on your resume. And it's sort of expected that this is an anticipated graduation date. You're also going to want to put your degree and your field of study. So for instance, on my resume, it has my degree, Master of Business Administration, field of study, International Business. And then for my undergraduate degree, it's my degree, Bachelor of Arts, field of study, psychology. But making sure that you're including both of those key pieces of information under the academic experiences component of your resume is a really great place to start. You may also choose to include your grade, your score, or your rank. This is where things might get a little iffy, and it's completely up to your discretion. A rule of thumb that I've typically heard is to include your grade score or rank if you're in the top half of your class, or if you're a really competitive student within your program. If you're not in the top half of your class, you do not have to include this on your resume, especially if you don't think that it would be help you get into a competitive program of your dreams. After the academic experience, you're going to want to think about your professional experience. Again, using reverse chronological order. So some things that you want to include: your position or your title. So understanding that a lot of you are current students, your position or title might not be a formal one. It might be volunteer, it might be assistant, it might be participant. But using that to sort of identify who you are within the organization is a really great place to start. Company name, school name, whatever it might be, location, city, state, country, the dates in which you were employed. And again, this can be whether it was a paid position or a volunteer position, but including the dates when you were active with this organization. When you're describing your professional experience, though, you really want to give it an active description. So you're going to use functional verbs to really illustrate your accomplishments and your successes. So instead of saying that you simply did something not very impressive, maybe you managed a group, maybe you were a team leader, maybe you facilitated a success. And you're also going to want to quantify when you can. So if you led a team of 10 people, you're going to want to include that. I managed a team of 10 people. If you were a tutor and you supported a group of students to move from the top half of the course of the rank, you're going to want to show the success of the people that you were tutoring. And that is really my first introduction to what an American style resume looks like. And I'm going to pass it back to Shanti to introduce our next presenter. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Lorenzo. You can start sharing your screen and go ahead with the presentation.
Perfect, thank you. All right, hopefully you can all see my my screen here, or maybe not. Let me see. No, you can't because I didn't share. All right, here we go. It's early in the morning, but hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Lorenzo Wilcox. I'm here representing the University of Oregon. And Brian did make an amazing introduction as to what a resume is, and so I'm gonna kind of continue that conversation and tell you a little more from the undergraduate perspective, and more importantly, tell you about one main component of your resume. If you're applying to undergraduate program, you're probably going to focus a little more on the extracurriculars, just because most likely you haven't gone to a professional academic institution at that point, and you haven't been able to maybe get a professional job position before your undergraduate degree, which is the normal situation. So I'm going to focus on what you can show, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how the undergraduate admissions offices in the US might look at this information that you present. So a lot of this is going to be extracurriculars. I realize there's a lot of text here, but it's just to give you an overview of different things that you can list. So on your resume, if you're applying to undergraduate programs, you're mostly going to focus on your extracurricular involvement. And extracurricular involvement are these activities that you've done in the past 3 or 4 years, so during your high school academic life, and activities that you've done outside of the classroom. So we're going to see what your academic achievement has been through your transcripts and other documents like that. But we want to see on your resume what you've done outside of the class. And a lot of students choose to list activities that fall under many of these categories and examples, right? So mostly are students involved in different clubs and organizations. Maybe they hold a leadership role within those clubs. Maybe they are secretary of X and X club. Maybe they're the class president or part of the student council, showing some leadership in their school. Maybe they started their own business club at their school, and that's, they've been running it for the last 2 years. All of these things really show some great initiative. Sports is also a great source of involvement and engagement with your community. We definitely like to see community involvement. or volunteer work, things that you are passionate about. Maybe you are working with a particular organization and devoting some part of your time every week to help your community in different ways. There's also academic societies like National Honor Society or whatever that might be in India or for your school. And so there's different ways to really show your level of involvement and your level of leadership. But the rest is just, more examples of to get you thinking about what to list and how to list it on your resume and on your application, right? So things like summer exchanges, summer programs, maybe an internship that you've done already or you're going to do, or maybe a research project. Maybe you're interested in the sciences. Maybe you've done research already on your own on neuroscience, and you want to show what you've learned. Maybe, that's going to be a great source of involvement for you to really showcase and to really make you stand out in the undergraduate review process. So I want to get into the review just to give you an idea of how we are looking at this information. The truth of the matter is it will depend by university, but many universities in the United States conduct what we call holistic review when we receive your application. And this is something that I'll focus on a little more on the next slide. But it will depend, how universities evaluate your extracurricular involvement, because some universities might look at it more closely than others. Some universities might not require this information. So it's good to know, what to expect based on the university that you want to apply to. But the majority of programs at the undergraduate level or institutions will require you to submit this type of information as part of your main admissions application. And a lot of this is because we conduct what we call holistic review. And holistic review means that universities are not just looking at your academic factors like a test score perhaps, or an undergraduate transcript or a high school transcript, but we're also looking at your personal factors. And a big part of your personal factors is your involvement. So this is why we really do value this information and why we give it a little more weight in the undergraduate review process when we receive your application. So I do want to mention grades are definitely still very important. But for example, for us, for the University of Oregon, a lot of our scholarships will not just look at your grades, but we will ask for your extracurricular involvement and ask you to really expand on what how your involvement has affected your life or impacted your life, and how maybe it has inspired you to pursue different things in your future as well. So finally, what types of extracurricular activities stand out on a resume or an application? I would say essentially, we first and foremost, we want to make sure that you show what you're passionate about when you're listing these activities, right? We want to see consistency. As I always say, I like to see depth and breadth. Depth, refers to the level of consistency within a particular activity that you've done. For example, you've been part of a particular club or organization, your community for 2 or 3 years already, and you have constant involvement with them. And also I like to see breadth, which means, a nice variety of different activities. Maybe you play a sport, maybe you're also doing research, maybe you're learning an instrument, and there's some nice varied interests there. But I also want to highlight that we really don't need to see 10 or 12 activities that you list. We really like to see a nice set of, maybe 4 to 6 activities that really show your consistency and engagement within a particular activity that you've done. Leadership is always a great way to stand out as well, but also you can show this with your, academic achievements or honors or awards that you might have received, and unique experiences. And it's really hard to define what a unique experience is, because it's going to be different, right, for everyone. And so we really, when we say this, we really just want to learn about you and your story. And as long as you write about that and make these activities as authentic as you can for you, then that's really what's going to help you stand out for the application. Some of the questions that we've been receiving is, what about COVID? COVID changed a lot of the ways that we can do things. We are starting to get back to normal a little bit, which is nice, but there might have been 2 or 3 years there where your activities really changed and how they look and how you can report them. I do want to say that universities are definitely understanding of these changes. We are very flexible. We take this context into consideration when you report your extracurriculars. And this is where creativity is probably going to help you a lot in just how you go about reporting your extracurricular engagement, because maybe a lot of students chose to pursue virtual experiences during COVID, or chose to pursue individual projects because the traditional extracurricular involvement activities weren't available. So just want you to know this is totally fine. We understand and we are aware of these changes. And so just try to remember different things that you've done during that time and try to showcase it in the best light. So I am going to go ahead and pass it over to Stephen, and he'll talk about the graduate world and how the resume might be evaluated at that level.
All right, thank you, Lorenzo, and thank you, Brian. Those were amazing presentations. So I hope that I won't be too redundant here, but let me make sure that we can see my screen here. All right. Hopefully you all can see my screen. Shanti, can you confirm that?
It's good.
All right, good. Sorry,
yeah.
my computer it got discombobulated there for a second. But yeah, again, my name's Stephen Swan, and I'm with the College of Business at the University of Louisville. So I think I owe Brian a good luck when I say good luck on your journey during your MBA, because we know it's not easy, but it's definitely well worth it. So we've talked about what a resume is. We talked about some of the key points for the undergraduate admissions criteria and consideration. Now I want to focus really on the graduate side of things. So as Brian said, you want to keep your resume concise and clear. It's going to be typically 1 page. I would say depending on the number of years of experience you have, right? So if you're coming into your graduate school experience with 10 years of professional experience, it might be hard, and you were at 5 companies, for example, or you've moved to 5 different countries, and you want to articulate those things, it could be difficult to condense it into 1 page, but you should try. Concise and clear is important. Also consider that when you're applying to graduate school or undergraduate school, there are additional inputs that the admissions people are taking into consideration, right? So when you're applying for a job, a resume and maybe a quick cover letter is really all you get to tell people who you are, to display your skills so that you can get your foot in the door for an interview. When you're applying to school, we're looking at grades, personal statements, various different inputs. So the resume for us is really what you can't tell us in a personal statement or doesn't show up in your transcript. We're really, especially in business schools, looking at professional experience. If you do not have any, because say, for example, you're going straight from your undergraduate experience to your graduate experience, that's okay, right? You will take some of those pointers that Lorenzo gave you and use them to articulate to the admissions committee a little bit more about yourself. So if you were involved in an entrepreneurial club at the undergraduate level, that might be relevant if you only have 1 year of experience after your undergraduate degree was finished. So again, 1 page, highlight your relevant qualifications and education for the program or the position, right? So If you are applying for your MBA or your analytics Masters of Science, we don't really want to see that you were on the volleyball team, or that you that you had some extracurricular. So focus on the extracurricular that might matter, right? So you were in the entrepreneurial club, you started a small business, you've got some experience doing X, Y, or Z. Those are the more important things for the graduate school admissions process. And then again, focus on your broad responsibilities, and we'll get into this in a second, but specific outcomes. We want to see that you were able to do, to do A, B, or C with quantifiable outcomes in a resume, if that is indeed possible. And as many of you all will be doing, you're going to be using, an overseas experience or education on your resume. Understand that not all admissions committees are super well versed, or don't assume they understand what your school, the significance of your school, for example. So if you were in or graduated from the #1 ranked engineering university in India, when you put your educational information in there, that's okay to put a little subtext for us, right? It tells us a little bit better about where you're coming from and where you want to go. Let me see here. So I'm not going to talk about all of this because I've got a couple of examples I want to show you, I think, that are more important. But the resume format is key. Just like Brian said, I like the idea of starting with a blank template. It's okay to look at examples so you know what the final product how it should take shape. But these are the 5 most important things that you want on a graduate school resume. So you want your introduction, your name and contact information, all of that will be at the top. But it's okay to put a little, 3-sentence, if that, blurb, so to speak, at the top of your resume to tell the person who's reading it kind of who you are. Introduce yourself to us. So I like this example. I read this the other day looking at a resume, and I thought it was really concise, right? So it tells us who they are. They're a recent economics graduate with great educational credentials and experience in data science. Also, that they are looking to get their graduate degree from the University of Louisville. And then the why they want to, because they want to expand their knowledge. They did that in essentially one long sentence. That's okay to put at the top of your resume because that tells me a lot about you in one sentence. And then we're going to include those important categories, right? Education, experience, skills. The GPA I have on here, again, for a graduate school resume, that is okay. Especially if you have a good GPA, it helps to do some research on the schools you're applying to as well, right? So for the University of Louisville, for example, our average GPA for our students in our business analytics program is a 3.2, right? We have some people higher, some people lower, but that's about the average. If you're graduating with a perfect GPA, 4.0, put that on there. That tells us that you might be come in a little bit higher than what some of our other applicants are coming in at, and that stands out to someone reviewing your application. I'm going to move on. I provided a couple of quick examples for you because I'm a visual learner. So when we talk about the main categories here, right, we're doing education. Here's a quick introduction to who the person is at the top. We've got their name and email, and this is all fake information, so don't try to call them. The education, where they're at school now. Again, reverse chronological order. That's really important to keep in mind because kind of like when we're just reading a book, we naturally read from left to right or right to left, depending on where you're from. But when you're reading a resume in the US, whether it be for a professional role or for graduate, Graduate school, we're reading most recent to past always. So don't confuse the reader by getting the dates mixed up. It's important that you keep it in order. So you'll see two different styles, same information being conveyed. This person had some experience over here, some more experience outside of what they're going for. So if you're going to get your MBA and you want to focus on analytics, but all of your experiences in hospitality, tell us in the in a one subject line or one category, kind of how your analytics experience, you were exposed to anything analytics driven in your hospitality background. And then you can include, more details like, oh, I worked at this resort, this place, here's what I did. That's okay. But if you're applying for an analytics program, for example, you want to draw that information out so we know that you've been exposed to some of those skills. And I put this in here. I know this is a lot. I would be so glad if the slides would be shared with you, so you can have this to kind of use as a tool when you're building your resume, because this is just some more pointers on what you want to keep in a resume for your graduate school application. One thing that I haven't mentioned yet that I think needs to be mentioned is the double check, right? Grammatical errors and redundancies are some of the easiest things to find. If you put your resume through Grammarly, or you take it to a workshop, perhaps even EducationUSA is hosting events where you can take your resume and put it in front of someone so they can read it. That's a huge resource that you should take advantage of, because those grammatical errors, it won't discount you from being considered for admission to some schools, most schools probably. But when you take that next step into your professional experience, it can really be the nail in the coffin, so to speak, that decides between you and another candidate, right? So attention to detail is important. And also the redundancies. If you said something once, you don't have to say it again. If you did one skill in one area and you're trying to keep it to that one page format, you don't have to add that skill to every role, right? Because we know you can do it because you did it at that role. So that's important information to consider as well. And then the other thing is verb tense and action verbs, right? So I have a whole list of action verbs I encourage people to use in their resumes when applying to both roles and to grad school. It's like 3 pages long, but they're important because when the reader sees them and it says, analyzed, condensed, managed, right? So these are action verbs that you're doing. It shows us that you are actively doing things, you're engaged. The action verbs are important, but also the tense. If you're going current tense or like past tense or future, you want to keep it consistent. So usually it's past tense when you are filling out your resume, unless you're on a role right now. So if I were applying for a new job, I might use the current tense in my current role and past tense for everything else, right? So make sure that you are consistent in those things as well. And then just a quick reminder that when putting your resume together, that's one part of your application, right? There are a lot of other parts: personal statements, getting your transcripts together, recommendations. Make sure that you are also having those double checked, making sure everything's as clean as possible. And then when you're looking at specific schools, lean into their resources that they're providing applicants. A lot of schools these days are offering workshops or resources to applicants to help them refine their application or their presentation of themselves while they're or before they're applying. So make sure that you look for those as well. And I'm going to skip over that. And if you want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to talk to you one-on-one about the resume or any other part of your applications, whether it be for our school or any other school. I'm happy to help you anytime. So with that, I will turn it back to Shanti. Try to start.
Yep. Thank you, Brian, Lorenzo, and Stephen for such great presentation. I'm sure this is what most of the students were looking for, a format that they can really understand to present all the great work that they have done. All of you have taken a lot of efforts in explaining at various levels of education how important is it to have a great resume, so that it really represents one important piece of that application package. We do have some good questions coming our way. In the meantime, I would like to ask you one common question, and would really appreciate if each of you can give the perspectives, your perspectives with regard to the institutions you represent or as an independent person. Okay. So the question is about, okay, we spoke in length about resumes. And of course, as Lorenzo rightly said, it depends on each of the institution and how they evaluate it, so on and so forth. So if you had been in the admission committee at your respective institution, how would you perceive a resume, or how would you evaluate a resume? What are those important things oftentimes you look for when a student submits a resume, either as a standalone document for graduates or at the undergrad level? Maybe it's part of a common app or any portal that your institution uses. And of course, Brian, you can give an independent perspective on it because I know you're a current student. So you can also share with us some important facts. How would you like to take it up? We start with Stephen because his presentation is very recent. I'm sure people can relate to it quick.
Sure. So what are we looking for? So I think Brian and Lorenzo made a great point. It depends on maybe the kind of program you're going to. So if it's if you're going to a public health and it's a research program you're looking for, then maybe more of that research that you've done at the undergraduate or in a previous role makes sense to be on there. For me, as someone who's in a business school, I'm looking for the same thing that a future employer is going to look at, right? So we're getting 800 resumes for a program that holds 100 seats. I have to make a decision based on the information that you're presenting me on who gets in and who doesn't. And for me, the first thing is grammar. Is it clean, right? Was it written for someone else? Did you just throw this resume in your application because you had it in a file somewhere and you haven't even looked at it in a year? That really stands out to me. And if you're submitting 10 applications or 20, and all you have to do is in that brief introduction section, change the name of the school, that is a small touch that will go a long way in making that personal connection to the admissions committee.
Over to you, Lorenzo.
Yeah, I think the difference with applying to undergraduate level programs is that most of the time you're getting admitted to the general university, not necessarily admitted to a particular program. So even though you might have a program that you're interested in, the information is really more general. Whereas, as Stephen was saying, at the graduate level, you're going for an MBA, you're going to tailor it more towards that, for example. But as being part of an admissions committee, and for us, the University of Oregon does do a holistic review. We're looking at some of those factors that we looked at earlier of variety and consistency. I would say, again, we're not looking for 10 to 12 different things that you're just listing out. We really just want to see those main activities that you've been consistent with throughout your high school education, perhaps in a nice variety of interests, for example, whether that is sports, whether it is your own individual projects, whether you have family responsibilities, that you have to, take care of siblings, or you have to do something like that. That's going to be unique to you. And I think that is what we're trying to draw from your applications. It's what is your story? What is unique to you? What are you doing specifically? So there's really no exact formula, unfortunately, to any of these things. There's like I was saying, every university is going to review this differently. But hopefully what you get out of this is that, you all of you are definitely strong in this. You have your own unique story. So you just have to find a nice way to put that story and put your activities into the format that we're asking for. So yeah, it's very important not to go out and create something that you really haven't done, because that doesn't help. That doesn't help anybody in the process. And so we really just want to learn authentically about you, and those are some of the things that we're looking for in your resume part of your application.
And as somebody that was recently admitted to a graduate program in the United States, I think that using Stephen's tool that he mentioned of why you're applying specifically for that program, and more importantly, what's the next step? So once you get admitted, what's your goal? And I think that that's something that you can include in that top half of the resume. And it's certainly going to come out through your personal statements as well. But I think that was really good advice that I received when I was applying for graduate school.
That's a great point. So you recommend that it can be an objective that the student mentions, so that it clearly specifies the goal and the future goal and the reason for applying for the program. Yeah, that's great. I mean, thanks for all your great inputs. And I think we have more and more questions coming in based on your answers. So I will go with them in order as far as possible. Okay, this is probably at the both for graduate at the undergraduate level. Should we not add our research experience and publication as part of the skills, or should we explain more about it?
So for the graduate programs, again, depends on the kind of program. But yeah, if you have publications, especially if they're in peer-reviewed sources, that's great. There are a lot of opportunities in graduate schools throughout the U.S. for research assistant positions. And if in your objective you are headed, that is one of your main criteria. I'm not going to a school unless I'm got a graduate research assistant position. Then of course, yeah, that's also going to come out, I think, in your personal statement as well. And so, yeah, anything academic related. So you got to look at it this way. When I'm looking at a resume, I'm trying to decide, are they going to be successful in our program? And so Lorenzo made a great point, is you have to be authentic. We have had times where someone has fabricated or exaggerated a resume, and then they put themselves in a position where they couldn't succeed, right? Because they told us they had skills they did not have. So you've got to be authentic, especially, it helps if those authentic skills and experiences are research related or 10 years of experience. But your main goal is to articulate to the reader, and knowing the reader is an admissions committee. So if you're going towards a research position, yeah, absolutely include that in there.
Yeah, that's a great point. In line with it, I have an additional question on this, Stephen, because there are students who probably have, like, say, some 5 or 6 publications, 2 or 3 research projects, and I'm sure they want to showcase all the good things that they have done. How would you perceive if someone gives you like a link for most of their a website link or a blog link? Is that generally preferable, or would you still want them to write a one-liner, because the page goes beyond one and nobody wants to, they are very conscious of it. So what would you recommend, and how is it perceived?
I think, you know, a LinkedIn profile link is
Mm.
perfectly acceptable nowadays.
Okay.
So if you don't have LinkedIn and you're looking to go to business school, you're already one step behind. You got to get on
Okay.
LinkedIn. That's great. You can also ask to submit supplemental material. You know, if you have an artistic background and you want to provide a link to a portfolio, that's fantastic. I know a lot of people who work in computer sciences are providing links to coding projects they've done. That's great. You can ask and certainly send a CV, which would be what Brian was talking about. Is that more extensive dive into what your background is, right? So you can always add that to most applications. If there's not a spot for it, no school is going to say, oh, well, maybe not no school, but we certainly won't say, oh, don't send it to us. We want to see that as well.
Thank you for that reassurance, because this is one common question we oftentimes get from the students about the links. Okay. Lorenzo, this question is for you. Does research that a student is doing, has that to be published, or let's say that the student is currently working on a research or planning to write a paper, can that be represented in an undergraduate application?
Yeah, definitely. I think it doesn't necessarily have to be published for the undergraduate. I think that probably would carry a lot more weight at the graduate level. But what we've seen a lot of because of COVID, specifically, everything kind of went, everything was kind of halted, the traditional ways of getting involved in things. And so students did submit a lot of work related to the research that they had done in their field, especially if you know kind of what you want to go into right at that point. And so we definitely were able to gather a lot of who they were just based on that, and a lot of kind of what they devoted their time to. And so it is, I would say it is very valuable. You can definitely submit it. You don't necessarily have to submit your works. That's, but at least talking about it in a paragraph or something like that in the application, which you will get the opportunity to do. And I see a lot of chats about the Common App, so you'll definitely see that there is a section for that, and how to add context to, I did research in X and X field. Well, add a paragraph of what that research was, and the time it took you to do all that, and that is going to be very valuable, especially in the context of, being creative during COVID times and not being able to do maybe what you used to do. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Lorenzo, I have another question in line with it. Like, since you have mentioned about the Common App, and I do see there are a lot of questions related to Common App. Maybe some of them, if you can just help them, get an answer, that'll be great. I'm going to summarize a few of those questions. Okay. The first point is, we all know that the Common App has only a limited options to present the list of activities that the student has completed. I know that they can only give a maximum of 10. Many times the student definitely do have things beyond that, and we do recommend them to put it under the additional information section. Okay. The question comes, if I have to list down those 10 list of activities, what is the preference, or what would be the right format, that which activity should I highlight the most? Is there any sort of quantifying limit? Say, if I have worked only 40 hours in a week, in a month, should I highlight only those kind of activities? Or if I have done just a 14 hours in 3 months, but that's a very, very niche work that I have done during that particular quarter or a semester. So what will be your advice to students, and what is the right way to help the admission committee understand your skill sets?
Sure. No, that's a great question. I mean, I would probably first start by consistency or commitment. And if that's if that's measured by time devoted, then that's I would start there. Again, I don't particularly encourage students to get involved. I mean, to list 10 things, you know, to always go to the max, because that's, I think sometimes students will do that, but they list something that they spent an hour in freshman year, right? And so that's really, there's not a lot of value there. I mean definitely, you know, like compared to the rest of the other activity, the 5 or 6 amazing things that you listed at the top, that really shows that it shows really what we need to get from that information, right? So hopefully I'm explaining this well for 6 in the morning, but you know, just trying to say you don't always have to list the 10 activities if that's the case, right? If it was just 2 hours 1 year and you did that activity, we really just want to see, again, your level of involvement within, if it's an organization, what your leadership was or what your role was. And maybe it's something you've done for the last 2 or 3 years. That's great. Put it at the top. You know, maybe it's something related to your field of study. Put that at the top. It shows kind of what your initiative is, that you're really committed to what you want to do in the future. And then that's kind of how I would prioritize things. Again, I did see a question about how many universities you can apply to in the Common App. Yes, you can apply to 20, but don't, you know, because you really want to make sure that you're narrowing down your list and that it's manageable as well, right? So I think it should follow the same type of rule for the extracurricular involvement. And if there are 10 or 15 things that you've just been super committed to, you can always list that additional information, or you know, many of our portals, you know, we allow you to upload your own resume. But again, it's important not to be repetitive and not to list the exact same thing, you know, over and over. It's just to add more context, perhaps. So hopefully that helped. I'd be happy to answer more questions about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it definitely gives a clarity, and student has to be more diligent in understanding what really involves more work or commitment from them. Yeah, thank you so much for it. The next question is for Stephen, and also Brian can add a little bit later to that. How to put all the experience in one single resume? I have 7 years of experience, and if I put all of them, it takes more than a page. So usually a page. So most of the time I divide the page with the 30-70 ratio and put education at the 30 section, and the 70% I allot for my experiences. Is there any you know, key takeaway, or is there any guidance that can you provide so that it becomes more concise?
Sure. So one thing to think about is how much context are you giving to each position? You know, generally you want to only have 4 bullet points per position. And with a 10-point font and 7 years, now if that's 7 different positions, that's a different story. If I have 7 years of experience in 3 positions, I can fit that in 1 page, right? Because I'm only getting, you know, 4 bullet points. And remember, you're applying to grad school, not a job, right? So if I'm an employer, I might be willing to accept 6 bullet points because there's, you know, say you have 6 different specific skills you want to highlight or outcomes that you want to talk about. That's great. You can do that, but you should be able to, with 7 years, if depending on the number of jobs, fit that on 1 page. It's not especially for grad school, it's not the end of the world if you have 2 pages. Just make it look good, right? There's context and information, and then there's presentation. So don't just throw everything you've ever done onto a piece of paper and hand it over. Focus on those key important things in a role that you have. You know, we all have these roles, actually, 20 responsibilities, but I'm applying for an analytics program, perhaps. I'm only going to highlight the responsibilities that are relevant to the person reading my resume. And at the graduate level, 7 years of experience, should be no problem to get it into 1 page. I think the 30-70 makes sense. You could even shorten up the 70 a little bit and add that introductory statement as well, that at the top.
I think something that I see a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think something that I see on a lot of my peers' resumes is relevant experience or relevant coursework. So if you're applying to a particular program, you want to highlight skills or experiences that you have. It doesn't have to be every experience that you have, but really the ones that make sense, that you're most proud of, and that are most relevant to what you're applying for.
Great. Thanks, both of you, for such wonderful answers. I'm sure the person asked the question is now very convinced that he's having the right format on hand. Moving on, this is a very interesting question. So somebody has asked, can you answer what defines a leadership exactly? So what do you see as a leadership on the resume? All three of you can answer.
Yeah, leadership. I'll be brief. I think leadership, some people see it as management of people. So if you have people who report directly to you, I think that would be one form of leadership that people are looking for. And you often see it conveyed on a resume as an managed team of X number of people, right? That's one form, but I'll let Lorenzo and Brian give us some more, I guess.
Sorry, looking for that unmute button. So leadership, I mean, yeah, I would say it's probably very different than at the undergraduate level. What leadership would entail, I guess for me, I connect leadership with initiative when I'm looking at it from the undergraduate perspective. It can be, if you've been part of an honor society or organization or club, sometimes there's gonna be roles within that, or student council, right, which is the best example of that. You are treasury or president, vice president, or something like that in a club. But there's leadership in having an initiative in a particular project that you were in, that you had an idea that, I don't know, that improved or bettered the whole situation. And it's not particularly tied to a role that you had within that. It's just, it was your idea and you went for it. And that's a form of leadership. So it can be, I guess, a little, I don't know if there's an exact way to describe leadership, but I think it's just showing initiative. It goes back to the examples of family responsibilities, like you're a leader in your own family. You have to take care of a lot of these things, a lot of different things perhaps in your household. That's leadership. Or you're doing again research of your own that you've been doing for 2-3 years, and it's been your initiative. That shows a lot of leadership, a lot of commitment, especially when you're in high school going towards an undergraduate program. But that would be my perspective of it.
Another example of leadership that's really taken seriously in American higher education is volunteering. And if you're really looking to get experience as a leader, that might be being a volunteer tutor. That could be taking on extra responsibilities around your school to help administrative staff or even janitorial staff. And being able to just sort of raise your hand and take on more work, that's an aspect of leadership that shouldn't be forgotten.
Thank you. That's a great definition. To summarize, it's basically the initiatives and the responsibilities, the commitment that you take, make you a leader according to the situation you're projecting. Thanks for that great answer. And I'm sure it is from one of the undergrad, because they are the ones who oftentimes come back to us about the leaderships. Okay. Thanks everyone for that great answer. So there are questions that are related to some content that we should be including in the resume. So one is about, should I include all the online courses that I have done? That's the first question. Any of you can take it.
So I think to the point that we were talking about earlier, relevant coursework. If it's relevant to what you're applying for, absolutely include it. If it was more of just a curiosity project, it's probably not relevant on a resume.
Okay. Stephen, you have a word on that?
That was a great answer. I also think that it's important that that everybody recognizes that the whole world just went through some really awkward and traumatic experience, but to varying degrees. But it's pretty common that if I'm looking at a resume or an application, or Lorenzo's looking at it for undergrad, we both are recognizing that the past 2 years, we all kind of went through the same thing. And one thing I like to tell people who are struggling with, was my progress slowed down by COVID? I like to tell them that that we all went through this, and if you came out on the other end, and it tells me that you're resilient, right? And resiliency and adaptability are really hard characteristics to convey in a resume or a transcript. But you're here, you've done it, right? So you are resilient, you are adaptable. You need to recognize and give yourself credit for that, and understand the people looking at your transcripts know that you went through online classes probably. If you're looking for an online program, now that's different. Maybe that's something you point out is, hey, I excelled in online education. But typically, I don't see a lot of students looking for online programs. They want to come to the US.
Lorenzo, you have anything to add to it? Because that might be very rare in an undergraduate student, which anyway, they give it as part of the activities.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think of kind of situations where we've seen that, but it is rare. We don't get a lot of that, but I mean, it would show. I mean, I've seen students learning a language, for example, and listing that as an online course, and that's fine. I think more at the undergraduate level, and not to get too picky, but when we see, I attended Harvard University or any X university online course, then we want to see, oh, maybe you have some credit somewhere else, and then we're like, we want to get more documents. So it can be more, yeah, I don't know, it can be a little more problematic at points. It would depend on how the university specifically reviews it, but I would also encourage students to connect with the advisor on that, just to make sure there's a good way to put that information in. But I would say the most common has been for like language learning, for example, during COVID, doing it online, or Coursera courses, as I see it just came in the chat, that I definitely did that too. Like I did a whole Excel thing, I think, online during my COVID times. So if you want to put that, that's great. But not necessary. I think we would focus maybe a little more on everything, but on the other stuff as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Like a Google Analytics certificate that you did online during COVID, you had some free time. Absolutely put that on there. You don't get knocked. We don't deduct points for you expanding your skill set and knowledge at all, no matter where that information comes from.
This question is more towards your answer, Stephen. We don't notice that the students who are actually changing from their current major to a different major at the master's level. Say, for example, a student who's studying engineering, mechanical engineering or something, wanted to go for a complete MBA program, or wants to switch over to a computer science program. We see the trend that most of them do mention those coursework that may be more relevant for their shift in major. Do you recommend that they should do this? Are there other ways in which they can probably incorporate this in their application?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. If you're an engineering student who didn't finish their program, or a computer science student who didn't finish their program, that will be both in your education section. You can say completed 14 credit hours or whatever, how you want to articulate it. I've seen it done several different ways, but we're also going to see that in your transcripts, right? We're going to ask for not just your undergrad, but any college credit transcripts you've gotten, right? That tells us a little bit more about who you are and where you're coming from. But I do see quite often people who they may have completed, a third of a graduate degree 10 years ago, and life happens, right? Family responsibilities. And so they stop, but now they want to go back, but they want to come to a different institution. They'll put that on their resume in the education field, right? And you can easily find ways in which you can include that. There are probably 1,000 of them by searching on Google real quick to give you a few examples of how to do it.
This is for PhD applications. So it's can the PhD applicant have a resume which is more than 2 pages, or they should also compress it to a 1-page resume? So maybe Brian, you can pull out those examples that you spoke about and probably give an answer.
Yeah, so typically for a PhD program, a CV would be more appropriate than a resume. And that can really be as long as you'd like, documenting all conference presentations, all papers published in press, everything. So a curriculum vitae would be more appropriate for a PhD program, and there are templates for that online, and maybe another Education USA session.
Do you have anything to add to that, Stephen? Do you find students coming for a PhD in management at your institution?
Yeah, so we have a PhD in entrepreneurship, and
Okay.
Brian's exactly right. The applications, so there's different kinds of applications too, and it varies school to school, but most PhD programs, a CV is absolutely more important. They may ask for both, but they're probably going to, whereas I'm going to start looking at a resume for an MBA admission, they're going to look at the CV first, right? To start thinking about how you might fit into their PhD program.
Thank you. This is a very interesting question. So it is like how to make your resume like an infographic. How is it perceived? Say a student has asked, can we show the graphs to show our trends in academics and grades? Would you encourage that? I'm sure it is from a very creative person.
I'll say just first, I think that's generally not advisable. You want to stick to that format. I know it seems boring, especially if you're a creative person. But in applying to most graduate schools, you stick to a very boring format. The information is what's exciting. Don't distract me with graphs. There will be other times and maybe other opportunities for you to submit documents that demonstrate your creative skills. But no, I don't know that I've ever seen a resume with infographics that I thought looked good.
Thank you. I mean, that well explained the importance of giving the content rather than making it more, attractive to look. So the next question is, should we create different resume for different types of profiles, or can we use one resume to apply to all the universities? All of you can answer.
So I would say yes. Think about it. Like if you're applying for a job, especially the more experience you have, you cater your resume to the role you're applying to. You will take out certain responsibilities and add in others if it makes sense for the job description that you're going for. Same thing for graduate school. You're not going to use the same resume to apply for an MBA program as you are, for, an international relations one. The information itself, the job title, for example, that doesn't change. Your undergraduate degree doesn't change, but the relevant coursework, like Brian was talking about, relevant coursework, you change those out, right? And you change out your responsibilities and accomplishments towards the relevancy of where you're going. So just like you're applying for a job, and I would even say per school, profiles for schools are different. If there are certain things about you that would make you more attractive to the University of Louisville than another school, switch those out and personalize it for me, right?
And I think to that point also, when you're looking at graduate programs in the United States, they might all have a different final experience, whether that's a capstone project, whether that's a thesis, and being able to make sure that you are playing to your strengths, that you will be successful in that project. And also just maybe thinking about school culture, whether they're more interested in research or in teaching or in community engagement. That's all things that you can really use to play into the school profile and when promoting yourself.
Thank you. I think I'll ask one more question related to the PhD program, and then we move on to some more undergrad questions. This is from a person who has actually submitted the PhD thesis in India. The person would want to go for a second PhD in a different area. How this will be perceived at a US institution? Do you think mentioning my previous PhD on my resume will reduce my chances for scholarships for a second PhD? Yeah, I think you are all the right people to answer this. So can summary is that, can I mention my first PhD in my resume? What impact would it cause if I'm applying for my second PhD? Does it have any impact on the funding that I would receive for my second PhD?
I can't answer that, actually. That's a great question. So I've experienced where a person with a PhD has come back for an MBA, for a master's. So you might think, oh, well, that's stepping down a level. I wouldn't look at it as levels. It's more that they're moving across fields. So we had a young woman come to us from India who had a PhD in applied mathematics, which is a very strong PhD, to do our analytics program. And that actually increased her chances of scholarship because she was such a strong student. So I don't know if, moving across PhD programs, if that has any drain on your ability to get financing for the second one. Brian, do you have experience with that?
No, this is news to me. Kudos to anybody getting a second doctorate. But this is out of my wheelhouse.
Thank you both. I'm sure the person would have got your answers, and that's quite encouraging for them to think about the second PhD. So now we move on with a question related to undergraduate applications. So the question is all about, how can I maximize my chances of getting selected for undergraduate scholarships? I know it depends on the university, but if you can give some generic pointers, that'll be great, Lorenzo.
Yeah, happy to. I'd say I think I talked about holistic review and looking at academic and personal factors. I would say the bottom line that your academics they usually do weigh more than the personal factors when it comes to financial aid. Just because the vast majority of institutions that award scholarships, they would be merit-based. And so merit-based would mean they're, directly linked to your academic achievement. And so the best way to really secure these opportunities or maximize your funding is to do your best in school. If it's at the undergraduate level, do your best in high school. We look at rigor of courses, so if you're in a national curriculum, we understand the rigor of that. But if you are in an international curriculum, try to challenge yourself academically and do your best on those. So that's going to be the first indicator of college success at the class level and the best way to maximize some funding. I was mentioning the University of Oregon does have additional funding opportunities for more based on your extracurricular engagement. So I don't want to diminish that importance, but it's still tied to your high academic achievement. And so I think if we're looking at the best way to stand out, it's really making sure you have a great transcript to show, to be able to really compete for the highest scholarships that universities can offer.
Yeah, that makes real sense. So, on the same note, as you said that you are looking at the academic rigor that the student went through and sort of probably advanced placement exams, all these things may add to their profile, right?
Hmm.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah.
On that note, would you consider a student to be having a strong profile if, in case, let's say that they attended a summer program prior to their undergraduate application, say probably in the sophomore year or the junior year of the high school? Do they
Sure.
get
I mean,
a,
we did I
yeah,
get
go
what? I'm
ahead.
sorry. No, I was just
Mhm.
saying we do definitely see that and a lot. I think it's great. I think it's a great experience. If they're able not just to say I went to this for three weeks, but I like to see more of I went to this and I learned this and now this is why. Like connecting to the experience, right? I think that goes for everything, probably. Like if you can connect to the impact of the experience, and that's really gonna carry a lot more weight, probably than just saying, I did a summer program, um, and that's that, right? So I think it is valuable. It's a great opportunity if you're able to do it. I would, if it's in the U.S., it's a great way to get a sense for what higher ed in the U.S. is going to be like, or what the college environment is going to be like. And so I think if anything, it helps you narrow down your choices, right? And helps you feel a little more secure about, going to a new country and going to the US specifically to study later on. So if you're able to do it, that's great.
I hope it gains some brownie point, if not in the
Yeah.
admission decision.
Sure.
Okay. Stephen, I think I'm going to route this question to you. It's about, again, scholarships at the graduate level. So this is a concern. Most of the students who apply, let's say, for a MS program or an MBA program, that they don't get such upfront scholarships like how an undergrad along with admission gets. Oftentimes, this becomes one of the important factor in them selecting institution, primarily the reason being affordability. So can you throw some light on how the graduate scholarships work at your institution? Is there anything that the students should really take care of?
Yeah, this is I could talk for hours about this one. I'll try not to.
Yeah.
So at our institution, we review every applicant for merit-based scholarship. So one thing to keep in mind is not all institutions cost the same, right? You could get so the University of Louisville, just for example, our MBA program is $32,000, which is relative. I know it sounds like a lot of money. It's relatively affordable for our academic consortium, which is the ACC. We are the most affordable. So our scholarships, let's say you apply, you've got a few years of work experience, a strong GPA, and you may or may not have taken some standardized tests, right? So the GMAT or the GRE, your TOEFL scores, maybe your TOEFL scores higher than our minimum. We're going to look at that applicant when we get your applications complete and say, we're going to evaluate for scholarship automatically. When we make our admission decision to you, we're going to tell you, hey, guess what? We want you at our school and we're going to offer X, Y, or Z. We are a GMAT optional institution. You don't have to submit a GMAT or a GRE to be considered for admission. And I've used general terms here. A lot of schools nowadays are going towards this, test optional, both undergrad and grad. At the grad level, there are fewer people taking the GMAT or the GRE. That means, and just to be frank, the GMAT and the GRE, it's one important variable that helps schools compete for rankings, right? And we could have a whole nother session on rankings, but because there's fewer people and it's important to rankings, that makes you more competitive across all schools. So you can use a strong GMAT, which would be, in our case, 700 or better, to argue for in your application when you give it to us, a GRA position, a higher merit-based scholarship, or things like that. There are other schools that will require you to submit supplemental applications for those scholarship dollars. So, you may apply to one school and they're going to offer you scholarship, just based on the application. Another might say, if you want to be considered for scholarship X, Y, or Z, you have to submit this application. So it's important that you look at the schools that you're going to and how their process works. If you don't know, and trust me, we are so used to hearing that question, do you offer scholarships? That's the first question. I think I often get asked that question before I'm asked our tuition. So if I'm $32,000 and I offer you a $2,000 scholarship, it doesn't sound like a lot. But if you're looking at a school that's $60,000 offering you a $10,000 scholarship, it's not apples and oranges, right? So it's important to keep in mind the base costs or cost of attendance. Another thing that people aren't thinking about necessarily when they're applying is cost of living, right? So if you're looking to go to school in Los Angeles or New York City, the tuition is one price, but you still have to prove to the embassy that you can afford to go and live there. And so the cost of living, let's say in Louisville, for example, it's like $14,000 for the year. In LA or New York, that might be 6 months rent. So if you're lucky. So you've got to factor in these things when you're applying to, can you afford to live there, even if you got a substantial academic scholarship?
Yeah, that well explains the scholarship part, because oftentimes we encourage students to spend a lot of time on our step 2 funding your US education, where we ask them to assess their capability to first pay for the education and then depend on scholarships and other things. I think you have well explained that, Stephen, and I'm sure many of them who had asked similar such questions have their answers in one go now. There is one last question that I would like to ask is, we did discuss about having hyperlinks and link to your LinkedIn profile, etc. on the resume. Do you also encourage students incorporating their QR codes, or are we asking for too much?
I'm sorry, the QR codes?
Yeah.
I've seen QR codes a lot on business cards lately.
Yeah.
I think a simple link, a simple URL to a LinkedIn profile is fine. I don't know, maybe a QR code fits somewhere. Well, if there's no context though, I may not be likely to scan it. It could be pulling up, it could be taking me to who knows where, right? So I have to trust the person giving me a QR code. I think that's why it probably makes more sense to give a simple hyperlink.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for it. And there is also one question, which is once again about a PhD applicant doing a PhD in India, dropping that and wants to apply for a PhD in the US. So everyone, their basic question is, should I disclose this in my resume or in my personal essay or whatever? I think one final answer, would you be able to give to all of them? Should they include everything that they have to talk about themselves, or what would you advise?
I think a
All
piece
three
of
of you
advice
can
that I would give is, if it's somewhere in a personal statement or in a cover letter of some kind, at least reference it in your resume, because it's clearly relevant enough that the admissions officer should be looking at it in more than one place. But also, you have to be careful that you're not being redundant across documents. So if it's relevant and you're including it later in the document, absolutely make sure to reference it on your resume.
Thank you, Brian. Stephen?
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're going from a PhD program in India to a PhD program in the United States that are, comparable, and you've done well, the reason you're leaving is not because you were, kicked out or you failed out, then absolutely include that. There's a million reasons why things happen to us in lives and why our resumes look the way they are. But to Lorenzo's point and to Brian's point, be authentic. If it's relevant, reference it. And if your current PhD is just, you've done a little bit of it, but you want to get to the United States to complete it, absolutely talk about that, because that's relevant experience.
Thank you so much for answering that question. And Lorenzo, one last question to you. What would be the one piece of advice that you would like to share with the undergraduate applicants when it comes to building a resume?
Oh, I would say time is on your side, so start early.
Okay.
Plan this in advance. Keep track of everything that you're doing. Throughout your high school or your education, and find a way to talk about it. Be brief, but be and include some great information for each thing. And also don't hesitate to reach out to the universities directly for direct advice on how they're going to evaluate your information.
Thank you so much, Brian, Lorenzo, and Stephen, for those wonderful presentation and patiently answering all the questions posted by our attendees today here in the Zoom room, as well as from the YouTube. All the participants, thank you for those great questions that you have come up with. And it's been a very, very interesting and engaging session for all of you. And there is a lot of takeaway from this too. We encourage you to watch the recording of this session on our Education USA India YouTube channel later on. If you are very keen to, have a recap on the format and many of those important pointers, all three panelists highlighted today. We have come to the end of the session, and it's time that I give few ways in which you can connect back with Education USA to get more information on US higher education. We are available for you on all the social media platforms. And if you would like to get updates on all these webinar series and various other sessions that we do for aspiring students, please do sign up for our Education USA updates. And we also have an All India calendar, which will give you the complete event list that is presented by all the 8 centers in India, and national toll-free line number if in case you have any queries about your applications or about US higher education, and so many other ways in which you can engage with it. If you have got all the basic information, and if you really need some help with your application process, you're looking for a guide or guidance, we recommend you to look at the individual advising memberships all our centers offer. Please connect with them and get more information about it. If you would like to know our services, and especially on the student membership, what all we cover, we have just listed the things that we offer to students. So do reach out to the nearest Education USA center to get more details. We also have a free Education USA India mobile app for all the information on our 5 steps to US study. And this is the YouTube channel. We encourage you to access it for more information. It's time that I have to tell you a quick note on our upcoming session, which is again one of the important aspects of a US application process: how to write a compelling graduate statement of purpose. Do join us on September 21st, hosted by our Education USA Center in Mumbai. And this session is catered to only students who are aspiring to go for their master's and PhD program in the US. And this is not for students who are planning to go for their bachelor's program. So do keep that in mind. And of course, we don't stop anyone from joining us. If in case you're thinking about your master's in the US, then this is the right time that you join this session. These are the contact details of all our 8 centers in India. You can take a quick snapshot of it and connect with a center that's near to you. We finished the questions, and thank you all for joining this wonderful session. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, my colleagues who supported me in live streaming and taking all the questions. Janet, Mirin, and Deepika, a big thank you to all of you. Good night, everyone, and a very good rest of the day for our panelists from the US.
Thank you, Shanti. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.